Open link in new tab. Open link in new tab. We'll leave that one at the very end here. I just want to make sure that we have all this stuff pulled up and ready to go. And then, okay, I actually don't need that. Like I thought I would. All right. So first things first, when it comes to the Renegades, Space Station, who, yeah, yeah. So I'm just gonna give you guys like my thoughts on all this stuff because I mean there was a lot of craziness. I never really got to go super in depth about the teams and everything like that. And plus, I feel like this is an awesome opportunity to get in a little side content piece while Smite servers are down. So I was gonna start things off for those of you that are like unaware of competitive play or like the SPL and are curious as to what's going on right now with Smite Esports. Recently, there was a little bit of a rosterpocalypse. Splice essentially imploded. Sino ends up swapping over to Space Station Gaming. Venenu is basically told that he's going to be dropped from Space Station as their primary mid laner. Because Ananster is going to be taking over the mid lane position and working alongside a Sino now. So Ven was like, all right, that's fine, but he found another home into Splice, and Splice decided to pick up Venenu and Scream, by the way, who was playing for Armada in the Smite Minor League, but is now going to be joining Venenu as his jungler for Splice. And I know that sounds like all well and done, but there's a lot more to be said on both of those rosters. And but I want to start things off here with Renegades, who have also been a little bit late to the season 6 Smite action. The Renegades are a team where, I mean, you look at the names on it, you recognize every single one of them, aside from maybe Nika, because Nika isn't necessarily someone that we've talked a lot about as of late. I mean, he definitely made waves back in the day when he first debuted in the SPL, but it's kind of been a little bit, under the radar ever since. But Raffer was essentially given a slot to make a team. And for those of you that don't really know Raffer too well, the dude is like a genius when it comes to actually making competitive level teams. He just understands, I think, enough about the players that he wants to be alongside of them. He just knows their playstyle, or at least knows how to appropriately adjust them, or even adjust his own to make it work. And when Renegades first came into the scene, I mean, no one really knew what to expect because we're like 8-9+ weeks into the season now. The meta has been predominantly figured out by a lot of the top end teams. I'm talking mostly like Rival, Dignitas, SK. I know United's up there as well. There's a lot of good teams right now. That's all you really need to know. There's a lot of good, healthy competition in the Smite Pro League right now. And when the Renegades first came in, their very first set was against Trifecta, and to be honest, no one really cared that the Renegades stomped Trifecta because I think Trifecta has kind of just been struggling as a team to really find their identity and to like really figure out stuff that works well for them because I think there's just a lot of inconsistency with Trifecta, but I mean that's another topic point for a later video maybe. But uh, Renegades essentially, didn't really shock anybody when they beat Trifecta. But then when things moved on and they had to play SK the very next day, that's where we really had to start raising some eyebrows and thinking, okay, this Renegades roster might actually be something serious because SK just took Dignitas, our number one undefeated team right now in the SPL, to a 5-game series. And I know it might not sound that crazy to anybody who doesn't like really follow SPL gameplay, but it's insane that Dignitas, the level of success that Dignitas has had this season, I think has caught a lot of people off guard. I know I was definitely caught off guard. I did not think that Dignitas was going to mesh nearly as well as they have. I think that that's largely credited, though, to Hurrywin and his flexibility with his own god pool. And I also think that Trickstank has stepped it up since, from what we saw out of him in Season 5, like, kind of towards the latter end of Season 5, I don't know, he just looked lost. Like, he just didn't really seem like he understood when to be aggressive, when to back off, how to reset. And I think that might have had something to do probably with the team environment that he was already in, where they kind of seemed a little discombobulated. But now I think that everybody on Dignitas is just so comfortable with each other that that's one of the main reasons why they're so good at punishing other teams. you can't afford to slip up against Dignitas or else you will lose that game. It has been a reoccurring theme all of Season 6 so far. So kudos to Dignitas for absolutely murdering it in Season 6. Those guys have been doing an incredible job. And that's where Renegades also comes back into the discussion. I think that this is definitely going to be a make it or break it type of week for them because if I'm not mistaken, they've got some really important matchups coming up this week. And yep, sure enough, Thursday we're going to be seeing Luminosity versus Pittsburgh Knights. And well, I think we all know what to expect there. But Dignitas versus Renegades is probably the matchup that I might be most excited for in Season 6 so far. I say that because Renegades, I didn't really know what to expect from this team. I never thought that any of these players were awful. I've always had a lot of respect for Cherio, especially. I think that Cherio is probably one of the sickest junglers that we have right now in our pro league. But I don't even think Cherio has like realized it yet. I think that there are still some confidence issues from time to time where like Cherio gets like a little bit of the experience of like stage fright, so to say. And I think once he's able to brush that off and kind of just embrace the like Lanimal that he really is, I think that we'll continue to see this team take off. But so far, the big discussion point out of Renegades has been Funballer. This guy went from, he wasn't getting smacked around every single game because Funballer always held his own. Even on SK, when they were losing every single game, losing every single set, it didn't really matter because I don't think I can ever recall, except for maybe one or two sets where like Funballer was just like, yeah, dude, screw this. I'm just going to feed with the rest of my team. And it's like, you know what, man? I get it. I completely understand where you're coming from because if you're on a team and individually speaking, you are a strong player, it can be incredibly frustrating when it's just not working out. Like, I don't think that SK roster was atrocious by any means. I just think that the level of competition in season 5 made that SK roster not work. Like, you just couldn't afford to not have synergy with the rest of your team, and there just really was little to no synergy with that team. Maybe outside of the playing field they were good to go, but when it came to actually performing in Smite, I think we only ever saw Funballer consistently perform week in and week out, and that's why it's so crazy to see him now in season 6. I feel like Funballer just has a lot to prove. Like he's trying to show everybody, I am not washed up. I was never washed up. Season 5 was not me, preparing for retirement. Season 5 was me being held back, and now he's just ready to like unleash the beast, so to say. And I think that he has done a fantastic job. His positioning is practically flawless. Um, he's been a large part of the reason why Renegades were able to 3-0 SK. And yes, they did 3-0 SK, which is pretty crazy because SK is not a team that I would have expected to have gotten 3-0'd in the fashion that they did by Renegades. It was just so clearly one-sided. And so that's another part of the reason why I think that this might be one of the best possible metas for a team like Renegades because just about any and every god composition can work right now as long as there's like a general theme involved, like attack or objective. Like there's been a lot of emphasis towards like attack speed based builds and like movement speed based compositions, things that are just really good at gas pedaling after they get a single pick. And there's also, compositions you can build based around team fighting. I think with the recent addition of buff to healers, we're probably going to see a little bit more action from the sustain game, so that'll be interesting to see. But if anything, the only thing that reads to me is that that's even more Renegades meta than ever before because you've got Cheerio, Dardas, and Nika. And I think those three alone have such a deep understanding of Smite. And that's not to say that Funballer and Raffer don't. Don't get me wrong. I'm going to draw back to those two later on in a second here. But Cheerio, Dardas, and Nika, I think they are kind of like the catalyst for Renegades right now. They've got to either play setup, and I think that one thing I would like to see a little bit more out of Renegades is maybe not as much emphasis towards Cheerio going heavy utility all the time. I think Cheerio is a really sick player. I think that, like I said, whether it's a confidence thing or just like his team wanting him to flex a little bit more towards the utility-based style of play, I'd actually be curious to see him go something a little bit more hyper carry oriented. Like, not necessarily the Kali's or the Najahs every game or anything like that, but gods that he can individually look for trade outs on. And I think it could just be fun to see how they mix it up in that aspect, because I definitely don't think that Cherio feels as though he's meant to be the one running rampant and trying to constantly find picks and stuff like that. But Dardas and Nika are just so good at already doing everything utility based that you could possibly ask for. And that's why I want to see a little bit more out of Cherio, because Dardas to me has not felt like a mid laner that's trying to play for the laning phase. He is solely focused on the team fights, and a lot of his build so far in season 6 competitive play has definitely alluded more towards that like utility based side. And I just think that Renegades are a team where it feels like these guys have been playing for years together when you watch them. Like, I don't know what their comms are like. Maybe I could be wrong on this, but as far as I know, when you watch them play, it just looks like they don't even have to say anything to each other. I just feel like they understand like how to time their kits together for like crowd control chains and things like that without really having to put in as much like vocal effort as some of the other teams. It just looks so clean when Renegades play. And I think that this is a roster after that performance against SK. I might be calling this a little bit too soon, but straight up, if this team doesn't finish in the top 3, I will be surprised if this team doesn't finish in top 3. I think that if you're Dignitas or Rival right now, you are sweating a little bit watching the Renegades, because you cannot afford to take this team lightly in the slightest. I don't think anybody was trying to take them lightly, but this is definitely a team that I can see doing a lot more, especially in Phase 2. Phase 2, I think they're just going to get even nastier. And I'm really excited to see what happens with the MSI as well, and seeing if Renegades are going to be able to qualify right at the tail end of it to make their way into the LAN. But yeah, all in all, I think that Renegades is a top 3 team right now. And maybe I'm calling a little bit too soon, but I think that them beating SK in a 3-0 fashion was a huge statement set for this team, and I'm just really looking forward to see what more they have in store. Continuing on the discussion, like I said, we gotta talk some of the other teams now. We've got to talk the Space Station roster change with Sino now in the jungle and Andester in mid. And I know what everybody's thinking. How do you replace Venenu, because it looked like Venenu was like probably performing like decently, but I don't know. It just didn't seem like it was working, and I don't think that Venenu is an awful mid laner by any means, but I don't think that Venenu is vocal enough to work alongside of Andenster, because Andy's a pretty quiet guy as well. And right now in this meta, you need a designated shot caller. And I just don't think Space Station had one of those. I think it helped them out greatly. Like, Alpha Jackal has done leaps and bounds for this team in terms of drafting. We have already seen significant improvements from Space Station's drafting phases from the couple of sets that they've played since picking Alpha Jackal up as their coach. We're probably going to continue to see this team just get better and better as long as Alpha Jackal's there to kind of be that voice of reason and to help them understand like how to better break down the drafting phase. So that's something to look forward to for sure if you're a Space Station fan. But getting back to the discussion about Andy and Venenu, I just don't think that there was enough vocalization from those two to really compensate for the team fights, because they just felt so reactive. Space Station was largely able to beat the lower ended teams because the lower ended teams usually don't have strong enough execution to overpower in team fights. Which is why Space Station was pretty good at, counter initiations, and then they would usually punish and then be able to pick up the sets from that. But when it came to, middle of the pack or top ended teams, you need that shot caller, and without it, you just kind of flounder around. And we saw multiple instances in past sets of Space Station where they would have a good pick or like get a couple of good picks, but then they would push for an objective too late, or they would push too deep. It just felt like there was so much clutter constantly as far as which direction they wanted to actually head after they were able to confirm kills. And I don't want to say that they look confused, but they were definitely a little bit lost out there. And I think it largely came because whatever shot calls were being made probably weren't being stated with enough confidence behind them for the rest of the team to want to like follow suit immediately. So I think Space Station picking up Sino might make Space Station incredibly nasty. I I still have to wait and see, but I think Andy is honestly a better mid laner than what he is a jungler right now. Just personally, speaking off of what little bit I have witnessed out of Ananster's jungle and mid lane gameplay. Because you gotta remember, Andy hasn't, it's not like he's new to the mid lane role. He's played mid lane in the past. He's done this role swap and competitive in the past. So we have a general idea, and I think probably one of the more limiting factors there for Ananster might just be his god pool. But I think that even with that in mind, Sino is versatile enough that they're probably going to be able to figure out something that'll work between the two. And I think it's really smart that they kept Andy as the mid because not only do I think he's competent enough to play mid at a competitive level, but I also think that because Andy was previously a jungler, he's going to have a better understanding of what Sino is looking for throughout a match. So it'll be easier for Andy to not even necessarily have to vocalize those kind of concerns or questions to his jungler because he'll just naturally know, okay, this is probably what Sino is going to be looking for, so I should be doing this instead. And then we all know that Sino is a beast of a jungler. I mean, the dude's a former world champion. He just won Worlds last year. I just don't see how picking up Sino could possibly be bad in the slightest for this team. And is it a little bit feels bad, man, for Venenu? Yeah, because it would have been cool to see him stick around with the team a little bit longer. I know he built up a really strong relationship with Bera, but I think overall, one friendship in comparison to unifying an entire team, um, unifying the entire team is usually going to take over in that regard. So, rip Venenu on Space Station, and I think Space Station's next set is going to be their most important set ever. They cannot afford any more losses if they want a serious running at um, MSI, especially not with the way that Renegades have been looking lately. So just keep all of that in mind because Space Station I mean, they've got their backs against the wall right now, and the last thing they want to do is leave it up to fate. But it's getting to that point. Space Station really needs to close out. Like, really, really needs to close out if they don't want everything to go downhill. And keep in mind, their next matchup is against Splice on June 7th. Both of these teams are going to have a decent period of scrim time and downtime to kind of sort things out between them, their own new rosters. And talking about Splice, that's actually who we've got next up on the list is our Splice discussion. Because remember, like I said, Venenu. Also, thank you, Maddie, for the Foxhole host. I appreciate it. But getting back to this whole talk about SPL teams and the like. So Venenu off of Space Station onto Splice. This was the most bizarre news. When I found out, I was flabbergasted. I'm not gonna lie. I would have never in a million years, never in a million years would have ever pictured Venenu and Scream as a jungle mid pairing. Okay, I'm glad that these two were able to settle their differences. I am super happy. I think that that's awesome that they both kind of looked at things and were like, look, dude, we've got to move past this. That all happened back then. This is now. Scream's going to be on Splice because he's without a doubt the best possible pickup that they could have gotten for a jungler. Um, Scream just finished up with high school, or he will be finishing up with it like super, super soon if he's not done already. So Scream's like, okay, I'm ready to play competitive again now that I have school out of the way. And yeah, Scream was actually the one who told Aurora, I want to play with Veneno. And I think the reason why Scream was so adamant about having Venenu as his mid laner is just because of the fact that despite what happened to them back in the day, and like even though they had a little bit of like a falling out in competitive play back in the day in United, I think that Scream kind of just realized Venenu is going to be the most familiar mid laner that Splice could find right now to um, play off of Scream's playstyle. And Venenu already has a pretty good idea of what Scream is like, both in and off the playing field, right? So I think synergy-wise, it's probably not going to take Venenu and Scream a long time to get used to each other. If anything, it's about getting Venenu and Scream used to everyone else on this team. Not Kabam. Not Kabam. He's not the coach either. Kabam, we all know Munch is the real coach of Splice, but that's a different point. But Aurora, Cyclone Spin, and Divios, I mean, talk about a core to be added to for Venenu and Scream. I know that they just had a set loss recently with their new roster, but you have to factor in these guys didn't get a whole lot of time together. Like they really did not have much scrim time after the change was made. It was so last minute. I mean, Aurora wasn't even sure if Scream was going to be able to make it to Atlanta in time to like play his games. Like that's how close they were cutting it for that roster change. So I just think that Veneno and Scream obviously have a ton of potential together since they're both so familiar with each other. I'm not sold though on how well it's going to mesh with Divios. I think that, there are things that I obviously don't want to say on stream because there are things that, I should be kept behind closed doors, but I will leave it at pro level play can be very stressful. It can be very tensions can rise in competitive levels of play. Moswell left Splice for full reasoning I'm not going to get into because that's not, for me to reveal. That's something where if Moswell or Splice or the org wanted to talk about, you can ask them, but that's not my business to share with you guys. Um, but Moswell's taking a little bit of a break from competitive. So again, Venenu was probably the next best option that Splice could have gotten here, and the fact that Scream wanted him. But I am really curious to see how Scream does with Divios because I feel like personality wise, they can be very similar. And I don't think that that's a good thing. But I definitely think that they're both so talented individually that hopefully they won't butt heads super often and instead they'll channel their individual talents towards Smite and trying to play together because Scream really likes ganking solo lane. Divios really likes having people gank his lane. I mean, any solo laner does, but sometimes I feel like Divios would rather be left alone in solo island, and that's where I think things could get tough for Scream. Because even in the Smite minor league, he had a tendency to try and play off of Baskin's lane a lot, and Baskin was his solo laner. And it's not like Scream had a bad dual lane option either. He's got Gino and Snoopy from Armada in the dual lane, but he would more often than not try to make a lot of his plays surrounding that solo side of the map. And I think that this team is probably going to be more of a phase two startup. But you guys also have to keep in mind, no one was paying attention to Splice last season either. I mean, phase one, or I should say, split one of season five, Splice looked awful. Like these guys were terrible. The coolest thing about the roster was all the people on it. Pretty much, that's how bad they were playing at first. And then they just kind of kicked things into overdrive after they all had a chance to like live together and see what everything was about. Um, but I I'm not sold on this being um the greatest Splice roster of all time immediately after the changes. I do think that Space Station probably came out. I think early on, Space Station came out ahead from the Rosterpocalypse swap around. But I think over time, Splice will probably end up being a stronger team unless Space Station continue to make adjustments themselves and continue to try and like push themselves even further. Because one thing that I do think kind of hinders Space Station is that I don't want to say they get comfortable, but I feel like this is a team where when they figure out something that works for them, they continue to play that same style until the other teams have completely figured it out. I would like to see a lot more innovation from Space Station, and that's something that I also think Sino can introduce to this roster and Alpha Jackal as their coach. So, yeah, it's a to be determined in action for sure for both of these rosters. But I am really excited to see how Splice, Space Station, and Renegades all continue to shape up in the Pro League. And I hope you guys have enjoyed my brief little Pro League discussion about Season 6. And make sure that you tune in on mixer.com/SmiteGame for any of the other matches that you'd want to check out from our competitive league. Season 6 has been hot as is, and you definitely don't want to miss out on any of the action. Thursdays and Fridays starting at 11 a.m. Eastern. And other than that, I think that'll do it.